Hello out there in Guitar Moderne land. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope everybody's getting vaccinated and staying safe and masking up. Things are easing up, but we don't want to have to go back into lockdown. People are getting out and playing some gigs here and there, and I hope they're doing well doing that. I apologize for my nasality. It's allergy season here in Nashville, but it's so beautiful. I feel compelled to go out. The medication helps, but it's still, I end up sounding funny. Also, I apologize for the sound somewhat on this interview. I'm working with this Rode mic here, and I'm still trying to find out what the input level is actually doing on Zoom calls. Sometimes it looks like it's very low, so I crank it up. In this case, it got a little distorted. Sometimes it comes out too low vis-a-vis the person I'm interviewing. Fortunately, Zoom allows you to separate the audio, but it's a lot of work to go in and then balance the level. So I'm trying to get it right out of the box, but I think it's still listenable and a very interesting interview. I first interviewed Mark Wingfield back in 2013, and at the time, I thought he was doing a great job of combining synth guitar with an original guitar signal. What it turned out was that he was using the VG-88, which is not, in fact, a synth guitar. There was no Midi involved, which helped with his tracking and the way he uses it beautifully with his whammy bar. And so I thought it was time to talk to him again because he has new releases coming out and still using much the same equipment, but we get into it pretty deeply. So I hope you enjoyed the interview, and sorry again about the sound, but I think it's thoroughly listenable, and I'll work on it. So here's Mark Wingfield. All right. Yeah. So how have you been faring during lockdown?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, missing recording sessions and playing live and everything like that, of course. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not suffering as bad as some people. I seem to be able to adjust to just working in my studio and doing what I can do. And I'm getting pretty fed up at this point. I'd like to get out and go and have a cup of coffee and go you know, for a day out somewhere. And yeah, and I'm missing being in the studio with a bunch of other musicians.
What part of England are you in?
I'm in a town outside of a town called St. Neots, which is about an hour north of London,
Okay.
and it's yeah, it's a nice rural kind of countryside area near a small town.
Well, I was going to ask you. A lot of your work is based on collaboration. I mean, you do a lot of stuff with Kevin Castning, I think, and various other people. So, what have you been doing in terms of that for the last year?
Um, yeah, it's been really tricky because it's I mean you can obviously collaborate online if it's okay to put things down, kind of layer things, but most of what I do, at least in the past like decade and a half, has really not been that based on that, although there might be overdubs. It's on some of the things I do. It's certainly not like a layered up thing. It's based on a performance in the studio. And certainly what I do with Kevin, it's all based on complete live interaction. And it just wouldn't be the same sort of thing if one person put their part down and sent it over and the other put their part down. Having said that, we are going to do something like that, which will just be different than what we've done before. But we had enough material actually already recorded that we've been releasing. That we just released an album called Rubicon One, which came out last month, and we've got another one ready to go later in the year. That was a previous recording, and it's just going to come out. And the only thing I've really been able to do in real live collaborations with Marcus Reuter, we've done, I think, 3 albums since lockdown, which were recorded live over the internet. Um, but the music is in front of a small audience. But the music is ambient electronic music, so the timing is not crucial.
Yeah.
And that's the only kind of thing that we really can do in that live sort of a way. But for that sort of thing, it works fine. Um,
Is
so,
that stuff up on video somewhere? Is it on YouTube?
um, I think the last one that we just did about 2 weeks ago I'm not sure if it's up yet, but it was videoed. The previous ones, I don't know if we did, but they've all been released, except this last one, which is just about to come out. And I think it'll have an accompanying video. But it's just like a Zoom thing with a bunch of people there and us playing. So yeah, I don't know how interesting it will be as a video.
That's the only thing I've seen. Actually, there's a group, a European group of musicians who do ambient music together, and they released what they called a live performance because they actually did play together in real time. But they found, as many people are finding, there's can be a lot of problems with live um, performance. Even if the musicians are in the same room and they try and broadcast it live in real time, stream it live in real time, especially if I'm thinking if they're charging for it, internet connections, things happen, glitches, all sorts of stuff. And if people are paying for it, they don't want to see, they don't want to know about that. So what they did is they recorded it live in real time over the internet with each other in different places, but they recorded it and then broadcast
Yeah,
a stream of that. I mean, there are just so many different solutions people
yeah,
are trying to find, during this period in terms of performing and getting live, quote unquote, live music. I mean, the best stuff that I've seen has been recorded, well recorded in a studio, um, and then broadcast as a live performance. Although recently it is getting better. I have to say that I just saw a performance live and from Nashville that there's a streaming service that was doing it live at the time and from the club, and it looked really good and it sounded really good.
yeah,
So this may be the future.
yeah. Maybe. I mean, with Marcus, it was he's in Berlin and I'm in the UK, so we did it using some software that allowed us to hear each other and record each other, with some help of some other people that helped us do that technically. Yeah, with a pretty small delay, but enough of one that you couldn't do anything where there was a real timing. I think the delay was, I don't know what it was. It said it was sort of like 100, 200 milliseconds, something like that. But whether it actually was that, whatever it was enough of a delay that you certainly couldn't have played anything that had where you were trying to play rhythmically together. But for that kind of music, it didn't matter. So yeah.
What software did you use?
It's called Listen To, I think.
Mm.
I'm not sure exactly the name of the company, but yeah, you put it into your digital audio workstation at both ends, and it records and listens to multi-tracks at both ends, and yeah, it works pretty well.
Yeah, I think Rick Cox was telling me about that. It's I don't know if you know him, a great guitar player, plays with John Hassel and he does a lot of screen movie work in Los Angeles, and he works with I think Andrew Newman, one of the Newmans, and they have that set up so that they can watch video and talk back and forth and record stuff. And there was a jazz musician who was posted something about an actual setup where he could play in real time with somebody, but it involved, Ethernet, landlines, and heavy duty setup, and just way more technology than most people are willing to put in. And as always with that stuff, I think there's a limited distance that you can do it still. I mean, because
Yeah.
apparently the latency increases as you get further and further away. Did you do a recording? Didn't you do recording with a harpsichordist during
Yeah.
this period?
Um, that wasn't recorded during lockdown. It was
Oh,
before, but I did just release an album with Jane Chapman, who's a classical harpsichordist, and Adriano Adwale, who is a percussionist, Brazilian percussionist.
yeah, I
And
was listening. It sounds great. Is she processing the harpsichord at all, or?
only in a couple of places, mostly not. There was a couple of places where we did do some processing where it kind of kind of turns into a sort of reverby chorusy kind of effect for a violin, comes back in again. But most of the changes in sound are just actually in the instrument. You can change the sound a lot. It's got these two layers of keys, and they can be made to sound, well, they sound different, and they can be made to sound very different by changing various mechanical things inside. So yeah.
That's interesting. The harpsichord strikes me as something that would be ripe for processing, just because it can sound very plucky, so it could get, maximize the use of delays and things like that. So it'd be interesting to work with. Um, so I'm going to do an introduction to this interview, a separate video introduction, and of course a written one, to which I will link to our original interview from 2013. I can't believe it was that long ago. And I went back to look at it, and something's glitching on my site where all the video that I posted is gone, but the interview's still there, and I'm working on that at the moment. I'll get it back up. But for those that don't know, and I'll be explaining it obviously in the intro, that your main thing is using. It was using a VG-88, I believe, the Roland VG-88 at the time, and then mixing that with software, MIDIing through software, and I guess various synth software, but combining that with guitar sounds in a way that I found unique, and that worked very well for me, because it really kept the dynamics and the feel of someone playing guitar, and it just didn't turn into, well, am I listening to a synthesizer player? That's not why I bought this record. I want a guitar player. So that's what you were using at the time. Has your setup changed since then?
Not essentially. I still use the VG-88 because, for anybody who doesn't know this, it uses the Roland synth pickup, but it's not a synth, and the synth pickup is just, in fact, a normal guitar pickup, but it's split into 6 parts. But what comes out of it is an audio signal, and the VG-88 does not play synths. It's not a synth. It doesn't output MIDI. It's a processor, and it can go deeper than most guitar processors because it can treat each string separately, and that allows it to do things like, if you got a separate distortion on each string, it means you can play chords and it doesn't turn into a complete mess. And so, yeah, and you could also kind of get deeper down into it and mess with the format of the sound in a way that wouldn't work so well if the strings weren't separated. But essentially, it's just a guitar processor, and it keeps every tiny nuance of what you do, which is what I like about it. Almost more in some ways than an amp setup. So yeah, I'm still using those.
Is there some reason you didn't upgrade, quote unquote, to the VG-99?
Um, yeah, really, just because I've got a sound I like, a couple of sounds, three. I really only ever use a handful of sounds on it, which I've made, and mainly one sound that I use for a lot of my lead sounds, but there's one or two others I use as well. And I guess I don't feel there's anything else I'd need in that area. I could imagine a whole different thing, but within that kind of a thing that the VG does, it does everything. And I like having it on the floor, and the 99 records on a kind of stand, and you've got a separate pedal, and it just, the weight limits for traveling, I'm just under the weight limit, and that would be putting me over. And it's always a struggle. Just, can I fit everything under the weight?
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's probably not going to get any better. But I forgot. So the VG-88 doesn't put out MIDI.
No.
So how are you controlling your soft synths?
Yeah, I actually don't use soft synths that much until recently because I just never found any of the controllers worked that well for me. I have used them on things, but I mean, not very often. On an album, I might use it on one track behind the main guitar sound, but as a rule, I don't. I just never found that they were glitch free enough. I've used everyone out there that attaches to a guitar. I mean, I haven't tried the ones that are built into the guitar. They may work better, but in terms of the ones you attach, they all have problems where you can do certain things, it works great. You try something else and it glitches. like, you play a chord, strum a chord, and it just does a glitch in the chord and plays a semitone down on one of the strings.
Right.
I could never find I could really trust them. Certainly not live. Although I have used them live, it's always a bit like, what might happen?
Right. Well,
So
some people embrace that. I just did an interview with Blake Mills, and he's using the old pre-MIDI Roland synth guitar stuff, and he said every now and then it'll glitch, and he gets into it. Have you tried the MIDI, the software MIDI guitar, the plugin?
yeah, I find that works really well. I mean, it's not 100% glitch free, but it works better than any of the hardware ones.
Yeah,
Especially for single note work. Yeah, it just works. Um, so yeah, I've started using MIDI again recently because of that. Um, but I think for me, it's always going to be something that's behind my main guitar sound anyway, because so much of what I do is to do with how I manipulate the tone of the strings. That if I was playing a pure MIDI sound, that would just all be gone, and I'd find it, yeah, frustrating basically. But I like it as a tonal kind of extra bit of tonal, yeah, content behind my main guitar sound sometimes.
sure. Are you using any analog pedals going into the VG-88?
No, actually, you can't because it just goes straight from that.
Oh, right, of course, 13 pin. Yeah.
Um, so no, I can't actually do that. But yeah, my signal goes directly from the VG into my laptop. Well, it splits. One goes just direct into whatever I'm plugging into, desk or live setup, whatever it is. And then it also goes into an audio interface that goes into my laptop and then is then processed. So there's always quite a bit of processing going on alongside my guitar. That's all software based. Sometimes it's soft synth, sometimes it's more often actually it's not. It's other stuff.
Well, if it's not MIDI, how are you using the soft synths? Are they pre-programmed or?
Yeah. Oh no, with the soft synth, it's using MIDI guitar too. That software that
Okay.
yeah, and which works really well.
Yeah, in one of the videos you sent me, I guess they were done about 9 months ago, one of your solo videos, it looks like you were playing some keyboard pads and then playing along to that.
Yeah, I did on some of those videos. And I do that sometimes. I don't do an awful lot of like solo guitar concerts, but I have done some, and it's something I do sometimes is play keyboard and then sustain that and play over the top of it, just because it's nice to have a harmonic thing there.
Yeah, and keyboards are more reliable still than the MIDI guitar thing.
Yeah, but I do a lot of sort of similar stuff where I'm creating it with the guitar, which is some of those videos also have this where it sounds a bit like there's a keyboard pad playing behind me, but actually that's just created by selectively feeding the notes that I'm playing into electronics.
And what
Which,
kind of electronics, when you say electronics, do you mean plugins?
yeah, I mean plugins, yeah.
What kind of plugins are you using?
Yeah, really quite a huge range. For most of that stuff, I'm trying to think which one I do quite a bit of that on. I think it's the one called Avarali, I think. Let me just play it for a second so you can remind myself. Oh, maybe it's this one. Yeah, there's one called Tega where I do a lot of that, but I think I do it in places on the other ones as well. That's on YouTube, and I do this a lot anyway. So it's on a lot of my other albums. It's somewhere or other. Is usually some of it where I'll feed notes into the laptop with a pedal. That's literally just it feeds the note in, and then bring the pedal up, and it doesn't feed it in. And also at the same time, that pedal controls various other things. And I have like a bunch of different, quite complicated processing chains which are parallel, a bunch of parallel things happening, so that I'll have reverbs that it feeds into that then sustain the sound indefinitely until I lift the pedal up. And then that might split off and feed into various granular plugin that kind of breaks it up and recombines it in various ways with kind of weird glitchy delays, and then that might go through another reverb. So it kind of mangles it, but keeps the harmonic content there. But it doesn't sound just like a straight ahead reverb that's sustaining, but it becomes and then I'll put pitch shifters in there and saturation and all kinds of stuff on different parallel chains, but all feeding from the same original signal, so that I can build more of a kind of orchestral sound with sort of high parts and low parts, and a bit that's shifted a couple of octaves down. That's been I've messed around for ages and found combinations of plugins that can take a kind of a harmonic soundscape, you know, some chords that you've played in like one note at a time that become a sustaining chord, and it can kind of end up with a fundamental from that. And so you can end up with a bass note from that. So I can have some that I'll have like a bass note and a, you know, a sort of, you know, a top end that's really kind of ethereal and then a kind of rich mid range. So it sounds kind of, what I'm aiming for is a kind of orchestral sort of sound.
Right. So the combination of notes that you're putting in with the processing blend together to create a bass note that you didn't actually play.
Yeah, it probably is one of the notes I played. It will be one of the notes I played, but it's what I find is if I want a bass note down there, like a sort of solid bass, and I just shift the entire harmonic pad, because if I play several notes, what I'll do is I'll feed in several notes that will create a chord. And I guess the reason I got into that is because I've almost never happy with the chord voicings that you can play on the guitar, because it just doesn't lend itself to the kind of voicings I like. I like more keyboard voicings, and you just can't do that on the guitar unless you're Alan Holdsworth, you know, and you can do this, you know, crazy amount, which I'm not going to try to make myself do. But by feeding them in one at a time, you can create any voicing. It's like a really close voicing, which would be literally impossible to reach on a guitar, but easily on a keyboard. And so that's how I started getting into that, because it's just, that's always what I wanted to hear. So basically, I'm creating a chord one note at a time from what I'm playing, single note lines, and I'll feed those in, and it sustains as a sort of sustaining chord, and then that gets fed into all this other processing, so that it can create something that's a bit more organic and changing and moving, and with different layers. And the bass note is taken from that, so it actually. Whether it's the lowest note I play, or whether it's not as if it's intelligent and can figure out what the root note of the chord is. I think it just ends up taking probably the lowest note and removes the rest. I'm trying to remember what the plugin that does it. It's from GRM Tools, and it's I think it's called Involution or something like that, and it's no idea what it does under the hood, but it basically you play a chord into it, and it kind of makes it into one note. And if you fiddle with it enough, you can kind of get it to do it like a one sort of solid note that doesn't flicker about. And then I'll pitch shift that down so that I get like a nice bass note. And it usually takes other stuff to smooth it out, maybe a reverb, maybe limiters, whatever it takes to get it to sit there, you know, as a smooth kind of low note. So yeah, that's how I'll do that. So it's quite a complicated chain. It's not that I always have that, but you know, that's one thing I might have, and it's basically a parallel processing with a bunch of stuff happening, fed from single guitar notes. And then the other thing I do a lot of is to try to enhance the single note tone of the guitar by creating various, you know, growly, screamy effects, which are just the guitar processed. That isn't just your standard distortion or emulation of a distortion, but something else. And that tends to be, a bunch of different things.
Is that in the VG-88 or after it goes into the computer?
It's all in the computer. For what I kind of hear, I'm just not able to get it from any hardware that I've found. But in software, you can just go you can really explore a long way out there if you mess about with it. And what I always really loved was the way saxophones could create all these different tones just within sort of one note. They could go from like almost a flute-like thing to a growly thing, you know. And the guitar, yeah, it can kind of do that, but in a limited way, and it's using a lot of distortion, which then kind of does its thing, and it's hard to get away from that thing that it does.
Right.
I'm talking about extreme distortion. It can give you a kind of real growly kind of thing. So I've I've been exploring different ways of doing that, and one of the things that really has helped is that there's a couple of companies that have made modulation things like ring modulation and frequency modulation, which have always been kind of cool effects because they can give you set them up right. You can give you a kind of growly thing or a thing that sounds a bit like a trumpet, you know, or different tones that you can get. But the problem is because it's just got one carrier frequency, every time you play a different note, the rate of modulation against what you play changes. So like, you know, like a ring modulator, it
Right.
sounds one way and another one, no, it sounds different. And that I always found really frustrating. And, you know, so I never used them. But now you can pitch follow, you can use software that will analyze your note, figure out where the pitch is, and it moves the frequency of the ring modulation or frequency modulation with your notes. So you get the same, if you set it up to be like a really tight vibration on your note, it'll keep that on every note you play, which is, for me, that was like, oh, that's great. It's what I've always been looking for.
And you found some software because it's interesting. There's a couple of hardware pedals that do that. The Electro Harmonics Ring thing has done that for years. That was,
I didn't know
yeah.
that.
You hold the pedal down when you play a note, and then it picks that note as your note, and then everything follows that. And the new, I think there's a new Bit Crusher type pedal from Electro Harmonics also that does that. But what software did you find that does it?
There's more than one. There is, I'm trying to think of the names now. There's one called Manipulator. That is from, I'm not sure going to be able to remember. I can tell you if you want. I can have a look.
If somebody looks up manipulator
Yeah,
name plugin, I'm sure they'll find it.
find it. That does it. There's one from can't remember the name of the company, but it's got this Snap It thing. It's like it's got lots of plugins, little mini plugins that go into a big plug-in interface. That is a single plugin, and it's got all sorts of things that it can do. I just can't remember the name now of the company, but I can let you know if you like. That does it. I think those are the two that do it that I know of, which do other things that I find useful. Yeah.
Well, moving back, let me back up a second because you said a whole lot of stuff that I want to unpack, as they say. When you say you use a pedal to enter your volume of your guitar, but also control the reverb, so is that a MIDI controller pedal that goes into your computer, right? And then, so you're setting up a channel or something for your guitar volume and using that to enter, controlling the volume of that channel.
Yeah, and that's what I find so useful about the whole. Another thing I find so useful about the computer thing is first you can get these really complex parallel chains, but second you can have like a pedal that will, for example, change the guitar input volume to part of the chain, for example, but also change the reverb time and the feed into the reverb, and then just at the very end of the pedal travel, turn it on to infinite reverb. And then if you pull it all the way up so that you don't get it'll be pulling the reverb back, but you don't want just like a dead space when you pull it right back. So just at the other end of the throw, it'll feed a little bit into another reverb to just give a bit of a tail. And all that kind of stuff you can do just with one pedal. So there's all kinds of things like that going on. Sometimes a pedal will be controlling like 6 or 7 different parameters in different directions and different ratios. Parts of the throw.
What expression pedal are you using?
I'm actually just using it's really hard to get them actually, especially light ones. So I'm actually using these that I've
The Boss.
turned into a MIDI pedal. So they're not MIDI pedals, but I've just cannibalized them and turned them into a MIDI pedal. Um, and then I've got a MIDI converter kind of box that you can plug an pedal into that turns it into MIDI USB. So yeah.
Are you just using one pedal, or do you have multiple pedals that you're controlling different?
Yeah, I've got 3 of those I always have. And then I've got like a couple of others that I use occasionally for other setups. But yeah, I've always got 3 of those that do different things. And then I've got a couple of switch pedals, MIDI switch pedals for switching things, you know. Yeah.
And when you host, what are you hosting your plugins in?
I'm using MainStage,
That's
which is,
Logic, right?
yeah, that's right. And the reason I use that is just because I've not found anything else that can do the CPU magic that that is able to do. You can have vast amounts of plugins on it that just bring any of the other ones to their knees. About a quarter of the way through, that's it. They've had it. And there's something about the way MainStage is able to distribute it across the chords. I don't know how it does it, but it just goes. It's like 3 times or 4 times the capacity of any of the other ones that I've tried quite a few of them, and I mean, it's not perfect. It also has things I don't like about it, but that's the main thing. It just has this incredible CPU ability, and it can keep the latency pretty low, even with all of that. I mean, yeah, of course, you're going to stack it up. Some plugins have an inbuilt latency that it doesn't matter what the computer or anything else does, it's just going to have a certain latency to it. But within that, it can keep it low without hitting the CPU. And yeah, there's something about it as well that's very forgiving about the CPU. Even if you do hit it, you have to hit it really hard to get an audible glitch. So yeah, no, that's why I use that one.
What buffer size are you running at?
It depends on my setup. I think at the moment I've got it down at like 64 or something.
Wow.
So it's pretty real time. But on some of the setups I have that have like crazy stuff, I have to raise it up, and then of course you're going to get some latency. But at the moment with the rig I'm doing, it's pretty low.
I assume you tried Ableton and it didn't.
Ableton, there's things that Ableton won't do. I don't know Ableton super well, but the people I know that do know it well, I think it might be brilliant on CPU. But I need to be able to press a button and instantly have an entire parallel chain up here with no delay at all, switching from one huge setup to another. And in MainStage, you can have like as many as you like. Again, I don't know how they've done this, but you can have a whole load of them. Each one is a huge, complex setup, and you can just switch a patch, and it's like instant or virtually instant. There's no load time, and there's a bunch of other things like that that it does that I, from people I know who are like Ableton gurus, said, yeah, you could do something not really like that, quite like that. I mean, Ableton can do whole loads of stuff that MainStage can't do. I mean,
Right.
it's like mega stuff that MainStage can't do. So it's not but just at this one kind of little area that I need, MainStage is the one. Yeah.
You mentioned granular processing. I'm curious what plugins you use for granular.
Yeah, there's one new one I've just got called Portal, which is really cool. I really like a lot.
That's PORTAL.
Portal, yeah. And I can't remember the name of the company, but it's really nice. And what else do I use? I use Melda Production Granular. I really like that one.
Is that one of their free ones?
No, it wasn't a free one. I mean, I find Melda one really hard to work with because they're complicated to use. So I actually find that one hard. If I got a patch that I want to tweak in a particular way, the chances of being able to figure out how to do that are quite low. but it has some presets in it which are just like really nice. I usually steer away from plugins like that. I like plugins that I can really understand, just like manipulate to get what I want. So I don't use a lot of Melder plugins for that reason, but that is a really good for me. It just has a very nice lush sound, and
And what's
it,
the name of that one?
it's called probably granular multiband or something like that from Melder Production.
What was the first word? Pro.
Oh, I think it's probably called granular multiband,
Oh, great. Just granular multiband. Okay.
multiband granular, something like that. A lot of the plugins are multiband. I think there might be a free version that's not multiband, possibly.
Hmm.
But yeah. What else do I use? I think those are the two I'm using at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was curious. Let's get into hardware for a second. Are you still using the same guitar?
I am. Yeah, I'm still using this, which I just absolutely love. And I haven't changed that much about it, I don't think, recently, apart from taking off an extra pickup. I had a Fishman Midi pickup on it that never really worked very well, and so I've taken that off. But yeah,
And you have a sustainer on there.
yeah,
Did that come with the guitar? Did you have it installed?
yeah. I put that in myself. It's from Sustainiac, which is a company somewhere in the US, and they send you a kit. I mean, they will do it for you, but obviously, I have to send the guitar over there, and it
Right.
costs a lot. And I'm all right with a soldering iron, so I put it in myself. It wasn't super hard, but it was hard to fit it into the cavity, and I had to do a bit of chiseling away in there, which is always a bit nerve-wracking.
Do you find that it's interesting? I reviewed the Ed O'Brien model Fender, which has a sustainer in it, and my experience with sustainers is that they're as opposed to an EBow, which whatever note you're playing, you put the EBow on it, you've got it. That's it. I mean, it does pop octaves in certain places, even on the non-octave one, but there's no question you're going to get that note to sustain as long as you want it. But with the Ed O'Brien model and the sustainer on that, I found that it could be hit and miss whether it would actually grab the note and sustain it or not. Is that pickup that you put in more reliable in that respect?
It's really reliable. The only notes that won't sustain indefinite, pretty much they all will actually. Sometimes a really high note, like really high at the very top of the frets, may not sustain like as long like indefinitely, but pretty much all of them will. Sometimes it will octavate on a certain note, but not that often. And then you can make it do that on purpose if you want, obviously. But yeah.
Is there
But
any kind of lag time before it grabs the note? Because that was another thing I noticed on the
no, no,
Ed.
it grabs it right away. And I mean, one of the things about it, I guess that might not work for everybody is because of that. There's a lot of energy in the strings. Like it's really a different feeling because you can feel the energy in the string. It's vibrating, it's pulling, and yeah, that might not be right for everybody's style of playing. It took me a little while to get used to that. And of course, you can turn it down. You got a pot, and you can turn that down so that it's less intense. But then you would get a situation where it may not grab all the notes.
Right.
And the other thing about it, I find because it's quite high energy, or at least the way I use it all the way up, when you stop the notes, you've got to be kind of, there's a bit of a technique about that, stopping the note. Because if you don't stop it well, obviously if you don't stop it intentionally, then that's an issue. You want to, because your notes are going to last as long as you hold them. You've got to think, when am I going to end this note?
Right.
And that just becomes part of your playing. It did with me anyway. But then you also have to be careful as you end it, because if you don't, it can kind of squeak and squeal a bit when you take your finger off, because it's a lot of energy on it, and it kind of rattle on the fret as you take your finger away. So you've got to kind of damp that.
I love the way you use it, especially with a whammy bar. It seems to really track the whammy bar really well as you're moving it up and down, which is interesting because it's probably changing the distance of the string from the pickup when you're dropping it down.
Yeah, it seems really good with all that. It's pretty yeah, indestructible as a sustainer. It does a great job. Yeah, and I love using the tremolo arm with it. It just opens up a whole other kind of thing I can do, which is great for me.
Do you have it going down and up on your guitar? Can you pull up on the vibrato arm?
A little bit. It goes. I think I can go up a half step on it. I don't use that all that much because I'll just tend to bend it with my finger. But yeah, occasionally I will do. It certainly does go up a little bit.
Right.
Which
So say it's not
I
flat
tweak
on
it.
the.
Yeah, no, I do pull it up all the time, but just like micro. I'm always kind of moving the pitch a little bit anyway, so it's like up and down a lot. But in terms of like really noticeably up, I think it goes about half step.
Right. So live, how do you monitor yourself?
Um, yeah, just through the PA.
So through monitors, basically PA monitors.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If I'm playing in a single, like a solo guitar in some small place, then it'll just be whatever's around an amp or whatever. But yeah, in a club or a venue, it's just through the PA.
Well, that's
Which
interesting. So you do occasionally use you'll use a guitar amp because that's such a different EQ coming out of it.
not out of choice. Just sometimes you play a small place and like that's all that's there.
Right.
So of course, I'll use that rather than not do it. But some small places don't necessarily have a PA where they've got monitoring and you're going to hear it well and all that stuff. And there's a good clean amp there, and I'll just use that.
Well,
But
I would think you run your stuff in stereo. You run your stuff in stereo. So would you use two amps or do you have
again, it's kind of needs must.
Yeah.
If I'm playing some small place and that's like all they've got is a clean amp there, and it's a mono amp, well, I just have to make do with that. Fine. I mean, to be honest, that hasn't happened that many times, but usually there's a PA or if it's a gig I'm doing in the UK, and I know it's going to be a smaller place, I'll bring my own. I've got a couple of monitors that I can bring with me and have in stereo. Like
So
if there's any doubt about the monitoring, I'll bring them anyway, just so I know my stage monitoring is controlled by me and it's there, and then they can do what they like with the big PA.
you do gigs occasionally through powered monitors, just a couple of powered speakers.
Yeah,
What kind do you use?
they're just old. Oh God, what Mackies,
Okay.
which are okay. They're not great, but I've got a graphic, DVX graphic that I use to make them sound a lot better.
Yeah, it's the continual problem with um, doing this kind of music, especially if you are going direct. It's you're at the mercy of. I did a whole gig going into two channels of a PA and then found out one of them wasn't working, so
Mm.
only getting the left side of whatever I was playing. Um, cool. So where I know Britain has been going through various degrees of lockdown. I think at the moment they're opened up a little bit. Where do you see the future going with this?
I don't know. I know I heard recently some hopeful thing that they are confident that they've got working on a vaccine that is going to kill any variant of virus because it goes right to the like center bit of it rather than the peripheral, which is what the current ones do. And so it won't matter how much it mutates, it will just work. And they reckon that they know how to do that, and it's going to take a year, like it did with the first one, to come up with that vaccine. So I guess there's there's hope on the horizon, but in terms of like right now, I don't know. I think it's anybody's guess. We just got the Brazilian variant arrive in the UK, spread 70% quicker than the other one.
Yeah.
So they've just started to ease the lockdown here, but who knows how long that's going to last? I don't know.
Well, how are the vaccinations going? Have you been vaccinated?
I've had one, yeah,
So you have another one to go?
yeah. another one coming up in a few weeks. How about you over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm in Nashville, and Nashville is party town. They barely locked down. I mean, here ever, which is why we have the most, cases. We were number one in the United States at one point, but I don't think we're quite there. But it's still considered high risk. But I've been, both my wife and I have had both vaccinations. We finally went out to yard sales in the neighborhood yesterday, and we went to a farmer's market. Still masking up, but just feeling a little more relaxed about it, and that's pretty much it. But people are. I mean, the clubs are opening up. People are doing gigs. They say they're social distancing some of the places, but there's so many musicians I know down here just desperate to play and going out and doing it. So
Yeah.
we'll see if it creates another surge. But I have to say the vaccinations have been going great to people who are willing to get vaccinated, since of course we have more than our share of crazies who are not willing to do it. I mean, I'm desperate for England to get it together, and the United States, because I have friends over there, and I'm really want to get back over there. We want to get back over there, and we have friends up in Leeds. We want to go up there, and I just did a couple of tracks, 3 or 4 tracks on his new records that are coming, new recordings that are coming out, and he's got a gig in October. It would be great to go over
Mm.
and actually to do some of the tunes at a showcase. But I just taking it one day at a time. That's done. Oh, I was going to ask you, have you experimented at all with, since you seem to be into granular processing, with the iPad apps, those kind of granular processors?
I haven't. I used an iPad for a while live, um, but I found it useful for certain things. But then just for controlling stuff.
Right.
Uh,
The Lemur type thing. What is
no,
it called?
using it to control Omnisphere.
Okay.
And it was when I was using Omnisphere as a synth behind my guitar, and sometimes just a pure synth. And there's a part of that where you've got this thing called an orb, and it's like an XY kind of pad in a sense, and the iPad can do that, so you can move a whole load of parameters with your finger. And yeah, I found that interesting and fun to experiment with when it was something where it didn't matter if it glitched, because you never know what's going to happen. But in terms of creating sound effects and things, I used that for a while. But yeah, setting up the Wi-Fi is always a bit on, especially if you're on stage and you don't know whether it's going to work.
The Wi-Fi, you mean for the controller to control it, or?
Just for that, because that was communicating with a laptop that had a synth.
Oh,
Obviously,
I see. It was controlling through what? Yeah.
yeah, it wouldn't be the same. But in that context, it was using Wi-Fi, so it was always a bit of a concern that it might not work, because sometimes it didn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's what are you using for an audio interface?
Um, I've got an RME that I use in the studio, and sometimes I'll take that out, and then I've got a smaller Focusrite that I use for live and stuff like that. Yeah.
Because you might be interested in this iConnect. I don't know if you ever checked them out, but they make these audio interfaces that sound really good, but also let you connect your iPad as an audio. It will send and receive audio and MIDI from the iPad directly, so you don't have to worry about Wi-Fi. And I mean, I've been using it as a send and return with Ableton, using multiple granular apps like Borderlands and iDensity and stuff. So I can just send anything from Ableton into that, have it processed, and then bring it back on a return. But it would probably work also for controlling too, if you want to use it as a controller.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't even know that you could take it out into an iPad and then back again.
Yeah, it's just a simple, your basic Thunderbolt cable goes into one of the inputs in the back of the interface, and sends and receives. They were really problematic.
I want
for
an audio, it goes that way. Okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, sorry, carry
Right.
on.
It just goes both ways. Yeah, I mean, when I first started using it, it was problematic because the software to set it up was just a nightmare, and I, it maybe worked on 1 gig out of 4 that I would do. But
Mm.
in terms of the sending back and forth, the audio interface always worked, so I could at least do Ableton. But they revamped the software, and it seems to have been way more stable. It's way more stable now, and I mean, I've never had a problem with it here. Of course, I know the minute I get out and do a gig with it somewhere, something will happen. But
But
but anyway, it's just a thought.
yeah, it's just interesting. So you use that because there's certain software on the iPad that you can't have in Ableton.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, now, I mean, there is more and more. For a long time, there wasn't much real granular stuff. And, not to mention there's the touch aspect of it. Some of the stuff like Borderlands, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it has little circles, these little circles that have processing, all sorts of processing, granular processing in each circle. And then you record an audio strip, or you can do real time, letting your signal go through it. And then as you push these circles over the audio, it will create granular processing for that, whatever that. And you can do multiple ones, and you can have set at different pitches. And, there's a lot of stuff like that, or simpler, that's not a real time thing, but you can set up a lot of interesting stuff. It's in there, and there are loopers. Do you use much looping? I don't never asked you.
Yeah, and now and again I use loopers. Again, because I want to have it in software rather than hardware. That's one of the things that's a bit of an issue in software has been looping. Not in Ableton, but if you want it as a plugin, I mean Ableton it's great, but as if you want it as a plugin, to get a plugin looper has been, for me, it's been a problem to find one that I could really count on. I don't know what it is with loopers because everything else is rock solid in plugins, but I always found loopers connecting to the controller and knowing it was definitely going to work was always like, never knew for sure. And I tried sort of 4 or 5 of them, and I could never be 100% sure it was actually going to work. But I've recently, Melda again came up with one that they call Super Looper. It's not Super Looper, it's another looper software,
Right.
but they've actually called their one Super Looper as well. And that one seems rock solid. I have not had that fail a single time since I've had it. In terms of listening to controllers and things, it just seems to work. So since then, I've been using it more. But yeah, I don't use it huge amount, just here and there.
Right. No, it's just interesting because what I'm finding is on the iPhone, there's a lot of different kinds of loopers available for the iPad that work very differently than the ones, either hardware ones or or software ones in Ableton. But anyhow, it's been great talking to you, and great to talk in person. I don't know if I don't think we did it. We didn't do it in person last time. I just sent you a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to talk, and thanks a lot for doing this.
Sure. Any other records that are coming up that you want to mention?
Yeah, let's see. What have we got? Um, I've got one that I recorded with Gary Husband and Asaf Circus. That's going to have various bass players on it. Tony Levin's going to be on there. And I think maybe 1 or 2 other bass players might play on 1 or 2 other tracks. Haven't quite figured that out yet. And that is mainly finished, but it was an unusual situation where we were in the studio before COVID recording another album of mine that's already come out, and somebody who was meant to do the last day in the studio couldn't make it. Their flight got cancelled, and they couldn't find another way of getting there. So we just had a day in the studio. We were all meant to be playing on their album. I'd done an album, somebody else had done an album, and we were going to play on their album. So we thought, what are we going to do with the day? And we can't waste this day. And I just had a load of sketches on my laptop, pieces that I'd been writing that were kind of finished, but hadn't been arranged yet. And I just thought, let's try playing these things. Might as well. And so we recorded an album's worth of stuff me, Gary, and Asaf, and Gary playing keyboards and piano. And yeah, it was the same session that I recorded that duo album with Gary on piano and me on guitar, Tor and Vale. And then we did a bunch of ones with two drums. I thought, Gary's an amazing keyboard player, but he's an amazing drummer too. I thought, how can we not have two drums on some of these tracks? I got two of the greatest drummers here. So we did three tracks with, well, four actually, with two drums. And but we didn't have a bass player there. So that's why the bass needs to be added. So it's a challenge to mix two drum kits, but that's been really fun.
Right. So are you, people can find this on, all this, find out about this stuff and keep up to date on it on your website?
Yeah, I'll announce it when it comes out. It probably won't be coming out till, I'm guessing, like the autumn. It'll be down to the label, to Moon June Records, and the amazing Leonardo Pavkovic, who runs Moon June, to I don't know all of that. But yeah, I'll certainly have it on my website when it comes out, and Moon June will, I'm sure, probably send it out in the newsletter and so forth too.
Great. Well, I'll be looking for it, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch and hopefully meet up in person next time I'm over on your side of the pond.
Absolutely. Give me a bell and we'll definitely meet up.
All right. Take care, Mark.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.